I never thought the woman who gave me life would also try to take away my happiness. At first, it was small, harmless compliments to my husband, smiles that lasted a little too long. I brushed it off, telling myself, she's just being friendly. But soon, the lines blurred, and I began to see a truth so painful it felt like a knife in my chest. My mother didn't just want me to be happy, she wanted my husband for H. When I married Daniel, my world felt complete. He wasn't just my husband, he was my best friend, my anchor, the man who looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. We had a small, beautiful wedding, nothing grand, nothing fancy, but filled with love, laughter, and blessings. Even my mother, Elena, stood by my side, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "Take care of her, Daniel, she's my everything." At that moment, I believed her words. I believed my mother wanted nothing but my happiness. Our life together was simple, yet perfect in its own way. Daniel worked at an architecture firm, passionate about designing homes that felt alive, while I taught literature at a local high school, pouring my heart into stories, poems, and words that often reminded me of my own journey. Evenings were our favorite. I'd come home tired, my hands filled with papers to grade. Daniel would already be in the kitchen, cooking something delicious, humming softly. He loved cooking. I loved watching him. Our home smelled of garlic, butter, and warmth, and it wasn't just food. It was love simmering in every pan. We had our traditions too. Friday nights were movie nights. We'd curl up with a blanket, a bowl of popcorn, and watch something silly that made us laugh until our stomachs hurt. Sundays, we went to my mother's house for dinner because family was important, at least that's what I thought. Elena, my mother, was elegant, graceful, and strong. She had raised me single-handedly after my father left us when I was only 7. She worked 2 jobs, sacrificed her dreams, and made sure I had everything I needed. She was my hero, my role model, my safe place. When Daniel first met her, I was nervous. Would she like him? Would she approve? But the moment she shook his hand, she smiled warmly. "You've chosen well, my daughter," she said. "He has kind eyes." That sentence melted my heart, because all I ever wanted was for my mother to accept the man I loved. The 3 of us grew close quickly. Sometimes, after work, Daniel and I would stop by my mother's house for tea. She loved telling him stories about my childhood, embarrassing ones that made my cheeks burn. And he laughed, not at me, but with me. I thought it was perfect. I thought it was love expanding. But sometimes, just sometimes, I noticed things. Little glances, moments I brushed aside. Like when my mother's hand lingered a little too long on Daniel's shoulder when she thanked him for fixing her sink. Or when she laughed just a little too loudly at his jokes, even the ones that weren't that funny. I told myself, she's just happy I found someone good. But deep inside, something unsettled me. One Sunday evening, during dinner at her house, I caught her watching Daniel in a way that made my stomach twist. Her eyes weren't just filled with motherly pride, they were filled with something else, something I couldn't name at the time. I quickly shook the thought away, ashamed for even thinking it. How could I suspect my own mother? Daniel's sweet, loyal Daniel reached for my hand under the table and gave me his warm smile. And I told myself again, you're imagining things, stop being paranoid. The weeks passed, our life remained steady, filled with love, work, and routines. But sometimes, at night, I'd catch myself replaying those small moments in my head, and a quiet fear whispered inside me. What if happiness wasn't meant to last? That whisper grew louder, but I ignored it, until one day something happened, something so small, yet so powerful that I couldn't ignore it anymore. It began with a simple phone call. One evening, Daniel left his phone on the counter while he showered. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious, but when it rang, the screen lit up and I saw the name, Mom. I smiled at first, thinking nothing of it. Of course my mother might call him, maybe she needed help with something. But then curiosity pricked at me. Why didn't she call me first? Why was she calling Daniel at night, when she knew I was home too? I let it go, pretending it didn't matter. But the thought stayed with me like a tiny stone in my shoe, impossible to ignore. The next Sunday, we went to her house for dinner again. I watched her more closely this time, and there it was, the way she looked at him when she thought I wasn't watching. Her laugh, soft and drawn out. Her questions, always about him, never about me. Daniel, how was work today? Daniel, do you like the stew I made? Daniel, you look tired. Are you resting enough? I sat there, smiling politely, answering when spoken to, but inside, my chest tightened with unease. I told myself I was being childish, jealous for no reason. But when she touched his hand lightly across the table, a touch that lingered just a moment too long, I almost dropped my fork. Later that night, Daniel and I were lying in bed. I asked carefully, "Why does Mom call you so often?" He looked surprised, then chuckled softly. "She only calls when she needs something like fixing her Wi-Fi or carrying something heavy. That's all." I wanted to believe him. His voice was calm, reassuring. But still, something inside me whispered, "It's not just that." Days turned into weeks. Life went on as usual. But I noticed how Daniel seemed to get texts late at night. He always smiled, then set the phone face down. When I asked, he'd say it was work or a friend. And I nodded, forcing myself to trust him. Because love without trust isn't love at all, right? But trust is fragile, and mine was beginning to crack. One Friday evening, after movie night, I went into the kitchen for water. I heard Daniel on the phone, his voice low, almost tender. "Don't worry, I'll come tomorrow. Yes, I promise. Don't tell her, okay?" My breath caught in my chest. I froze, holding the glass tightly in my hand. Who was he talking to? And why was he asking someone not to tell me? When I walked back in, he hung up quickly. His smile was too quick, too forced. "Just work stuff," he said. I wanted to scream, to ask him why he was lying, but instead I whispered, "Oh, okay." The next morning, Daniel left early. He kissed my forehead and said he had a site meeting for work, but something told me follow him. So I did, quietly, carefully. And where did he go? Not to the office, not to any site, but straight to my mother's house. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd faint. I parked a little away, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. Through the window, I saw him, carrying groceries inside for her. She touched his arm, he laughed softly. It looked so innocent, so normal. But to me it was betrayal because he had lied. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing my own thoughts echo. Why didn't he tell me? Why my mother? Why the secrets? The cracks in my trust were spreading faster now, and I couldn't stop them. Still, I told myself, don't jump to conclusions, maybe it's nothing. Maybe you're imagining it all. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, terribly wrong. And soon, I'd be forced to face the truth I wasn't ready to see. The following week, Daniel seemed distant. Not cold, not unkind, but distracted. His eyes wandered when I spoke. His smile seemed delayed, like it needed effort. And worst of all, his phone never left his side anymore. At dinner, when it buzzed, he excused himself quickly. He would step into the other room, whispering, and return with a casual smile. But I wasn't blind and I wasn't stupid. I knew when something was being hidden from me. I told myself to stay calm, to be logical. So one afternoon, I asked directly, Daniel, why do you spend so much time at Mom's? His fork froze halfway to his mouth. He blinked, then laughed softly. Your mom is lonely. She just asks me for help now and then. You should be glad I'm there for her. I nodded slowly. On the outside, I smiled, pretending to accept it. But inside, my chest burned, because it didn't sound like the whole truth. The following Sunday, we visited my mother again. I entered first, holding flowers for her. And there she was, glowing with happiness, as though she had been waiting all day. Her eyes lit up, not at me, but at Daniel. Daniel, you came, she exclaimed. Her voice had a warmth, a softness, that stung my heart. She reached out, hugging him first, her arms lingering around him. I stood there, invisible, holding the flowers like a fool. At the dinner table, it was the same scene again. Every word, every glance, every laugh seemed reserved for him. I tried to join. I tried to speak, but my mother's focus never left Daniel. And Daniel, though polite, though careful, responded with a quiet fondness that cut me deeply. When we drove home that night, silence filled the car. Daniel hummed softly, as though nothing was wrong, but I couldn't keep quiet anymore. So I asked, why does she act that way with you? Why do you let her? His hands tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't look at me. She's just being friendly, he said quickly. You're imagining things. Imagining things. That phrase spun inside my head like a curse, because I wasn't imagining the way her hand touched his. I wasn't imagining the way she looked at him, with eyes that should never belong to a mother when she gazes at her son-in-law. That night, when Daniel fell asleep, I lay awake again. My mind racing, my chest heavy. I remembered how I once felt safe in his arms, how I once trusted my mother more than anyone. And now, both of them felt like strangers. I wanted proof. I needed proof. So, I started paying attention to the little things. His shirts, smelling faintly of her perfume. Her fridge, filled with Daniel's favorite snacks. Her smiles, brighter when he walked into the room than when I did. The world around me was the same. Yet my reality was crumbling piece by piece. Every gesture, every secret call, every lie was a hammer chipping away at the life I thought I had. And still, I kept quiet because I was terrified. Terrified of what I might discover if I pushed too hard. Terrified that the truth would break me completely. But deep inside, I knew this fragile calm wouldn't last forever. Something was coming, something sharp, inevitable and cruel. And soon, The truth would reveal itself in ways I could never escape. The days turned into weeks, and I felt like I was living in two worlds. One world was the life I showed to others, a wife, a daughter, a woman who smiled politely and said everything was fine. And the other world was the storm inside me, the doubt, the jealousy, the fear that my husband and my mother were keeping something from me. I tried distracting myself with work, with chores, with little hobbies, but every time Daniel's phone buzzed, or every time my mother called him instead of me, my chest tightened like a rope pulling around my heart. One evening, I overheard Daniel on the phone. He was in the kitchen speaking in a low voice. I couldn't hear everything, just a few words. "I'll come tomorrow, don't worry, she won't know." When I stepped closer, he ended the call quickly. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He gave me a smile, too calm, too quick. "Work, just work." Work at 10 p.m. with a softness in his tone I had never heard him use with colleagues before. I wanted to scream, to shake him, and demand the truth. But instead, I swallowed my anger, because if I accused him without proof, I would only look like the paranoid wife. The next day, I made a decision. I told Daniel I was busy, that I had a meeting at work, but instead of going to the office, I followed him. My heart pounded as I trailed his car. Every turn he made, every stoplight we passed, I felt like I was chasing the shadow of my own fears. Until finally, he pulled up in front of my mother's house. I sat there in my car, hidden behind the corner. I watched him walk to her door, and when she opened it, her smile, oh God, her smile. It wasn't the smile of a mother greeting her daughter's husband. It was softer, sweeter, filled with something forbidden. She touched his arm gently, pulling him inside, and the door closed. My whole world shattered in that moment. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Tears blurred my eyes, but I forced myself to stay quiet, to stay hidden, because part of me still prayed. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe I was wrong. But deep down, I knew this was the moment I had been dreading. The proof I didn't want but couldn't ignore anymore. I drove away, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I wanted to scream, to cry, to crash into something just to feel a pain that matched the one tearing me apart inside. Instead, I went home, locked myself in the bedroom, and sat on the floor in silence. That night, when Daniel returned, he acted normal. He kissed my forehead, asked about my day, smiled as though nothing had happened. And that smile, that lie, cut deeper than a knife. I stared at him, wondering how he could lie so easily, how my own husband could betray me, with the one person who should have been protecting me most in this world, my mother. I didn't say anything, not yet, because a storm like this couldn't be unleashed carelessly. It needed time, it needed planning. But inside, something had broken. And I knew nothing between us would ever be the same again. The house felt colder, the dinners quieter, the nights longer. Every look, every word, every touch between Daniel and me was poisoned by suspicion. And yet, I still played the role of the perfect wife, smiling, cooking, asking about his day. But inside, I was preparing, waiting, biding my time. Because one day soon the truth would come crashing down. And when it did, no one would leave unscarred. The night I saw Daniel walk into my mother's house, I told myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But the truth has a way of clawing its way into your chest until it cannot be ignored anymore. The next morning, I pretended to be fine. I made breakfast, laid out toast and eggs, poured his coffee just the way he liked it. Daniel sat across from me, scrolling on his phone, smiling faintly, and I stared at his face, the same face I once trusted, the same man I once loved so blindly. Now, every smile looked like a mask, every word tasted like poison. "Are you okay?" he asked, finally looking up. I forced a smile. "Yes, just tired." He nodded, went back to his phone. I wanted to scream, "Tired? I'm broken. Daniel, broken because of you." But instead, I stayed silent. Later that afternoon, I decided to test him. I called my mother. "Hi, Mama, what are you doing today?" Her voice was calm, too calm. "Oh, nothing. Just resting, watching some old TV shows." Resting? Watching TV? I almost laughed through my tears. Because I knew, just hours ago, Daniel had been at her door. My heart twisted. The two people I loved most in this world were now my greatest enemies. That evening, Daniel came home late. I asked him casually, "Where were you?" He shrugged. "Work ran late meetings." Meetings? At the exact time I knew he had been with her. The lie burned through me. I wanted to grab his phone, throw it against the wall, demand the truth. But instead, I said nothing. Because anger without proof is just noise. And I wanted more than noise. I wanted answers. The next day, when Daniel left for work, I opened his laptop. My hands shook as I typed in his password. It worked. At first, there was nothing unusual, work files, emails. But then I saw a folder, hidden deeper, almost buried under layers of files. When I opened it, my blood froze. Photos. Not many, but enough. Pictures of Daniel and my mother having dinner at restaurants, sitting too close, smiling at each other in ways that were never innocent. And one photo, her hand on his face, his lips dangerously close to hers. I slammed the laptop shut, my chest heaving, tears spilling. It was real. No more excuses. No more lies. They were betraying me. That night, when Daniel came home, I couldn't even look at him. I locked myself in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. My eyes were swollen, my skin pale, my lips trembling. Who was I anymore? A wife? A daughter? Or a fool caught between their secret affair? I cried until my throat hurt, until my eyes burned. And then the crying stopped, because inside me something else began to grow. Not just anger, not just grief, but a dark, cold, dangerous idea. Revenge. If they wanted to break me, I would show them what it meant to be broken. If they thought I would stay silent, they had no idea who I could become. But revenge is not simple. It is fire, and fire destroys everything it touches, even the person holding the match. I dried my tears, stepped out of the bathroom, and smiled at Daniel as if nothing was wrong, because now I had a new role to play. Not the betrayed wife, but the silent hunter. And he didn't even know it yet. The first night after I discovered the photos, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. Her hand on his cheek, his smile that once belonged to me, now shared with her. It was unbearable. But in that sleepless night, I began to think, not like a broken wife, but like someone preparing for war. If Daniel and my mother could lie so easily, then I had to learn to lie better. If they could keep secrets, then I needed secrets of my own. So the next morning, I played my part. I kissed Daniel on the cheek before he left for work. I even texted my mother later, pretending I missed her. Both of them answered sweetly, as if nothing was wrong. And that was when I realized I had an advantage. They thought I was blind. They thought I was weak. And that would be their biggest mistake. I started small, checking Daniel's schedule more carefully, noting every excuse he gave me. Sometimes he said work meeting, other times traffic. But the times never matched. I began writing them down in a hidden notebook. Dates, times, excuses, every lie recorded. Then, I started following. One evening, I told Daniel I was visiting a friend. Instead, I followed his car. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded so loudly, I thought he might hear it. He drove across town and parked near my mother's neighborhood. I stopped a few houses away, my chest heavy with dread. And then I saw him, walking up to her door. She opened it, smiling, her eyes soft in a way a mother should never look at her daughter's husband. He went inside, and the door closed. My stomach twisted. It was real. Not just in photos, not just in hidden files, but in front of me. I almost wanted to storm in, scream, destroy everything in that moment. But no, revenge is not loud. It is patient. It waits, it watches, it strikes only when the time is right. I drove away, tears streaming down my face, my hands trembling. And yet deep inside, I felt a strange kind of power. Because now, I wasn't just a victim. I was gathering proof. And proof is a weapon. The next week, I began setting small traps. I casually asked Daniel about his late work hours. Sometimes he fumbled with answers, sometimes he lied smoothly. Either way, I smiled sweetly and pretended to believe him. But inside, every word was fuel to the fire burning in me. One night, while he slept, I quietly took his phone. My heart raced as I unlocked it with his fingerprint. There they were, the messages. Short, dangerous lines that confirmed everything. Her, I can't wait to see you again. Him, you're the only one who understands me. Her, don't let her find out, it will destroy everything. Destroy everything. I laughed bitterly in the dark. They were already destroying me, but they didn't know. I was planning their destruction too. Still, the danger haunted me. What if Daniel woke up and caught me with his phone? What if my mother sensed my distance and grew suspicious? What if they found out I knew before I was ready to strike? Every step I took felt like walking on glass. But I reminded myself, pain was already my reality. The only way forward was through fire. So I kept going. I saved copies of the messages, sent them secretly to my email. I printed out photos from his hidden folder. I gathered evidence piece by piece. Every page, every image, every word was a nail in the coffin I was building for them. But revenge is never just about planning. It is about control. And every day I had to control my rage. Every dinner where I smiled at Daniel across the table. Every phone call where I pretended to laugh with my mother. Every lie I told them back was heavier than the last. One night, as I lay awake, I whispered to myself, what if they find out it was me? The thought chilled me. Because if Daniel discovered I was collecting proof, he would never forgive me. And if my mother realized I knew, she would strike first, turning everyone against me. I was living with enemies under the mask of family. And the danger was real. But danger no longer scared me. What scared me was being silent forever. And that I would never allow. So I kept planning, waiting, preparing for the day I would finally strike. And when that day came, neither Daniel nor my mother would ever see it coming. The more evidence I gathered, the stronger I felt. But evidence alone was not enough. I needed to make them nervous. I needed to make them wonder, does she know? So, I started with little things. One evening at dinner, I looked at Daniel and said softly, "You know, secrets don't stay hidden forever." His fork froze halfway to his mouth. Then he laughed nervously, asking what I meant. I smiled sweetly and shrugged. Nothing, just something I read. But inside, I was watching his every reaction. Another time, I visited my mother. I placed my hand on hers and whispered, "You've always been such a good role model. I hope you never disappoint me." Her eyes widened for just a second, then she forced a laugh. But I saw it. The flicker of fear. It was working. They didn't know how much I knew, but they began to wonder. Still, I couldn't push too hard, too fast. Revenge is a game of patience. So I played along while quietly setting traps. One day, I left Daniel's phone unlocked on purpose, right where he would see it, but not before forwarding his secret messages to my hidden folder. When he picked it up, his face went pale. He glanced at me nervously, as if wondering if I had seen anything. I pretended not to notice. The silence that followed was thick, and I loved it. The next trap was for my mother. I told her, "Daniel is planning something special for me. I can feel it." Her eyes twitched, her smile faded for a moment. Because she knew he was planning things with her, not me. I left her in that discomfort, enjoying the quiet poison sinking into her thoughts. But revenge isn't just about words. It's about action. So I began testing their loyalty in subtle ways. I asked Daniel to drive me somewhere on an evening I knew he usually met her. He hesitated, stammered, then made up a weak excuse. I smiled politely, but inside, I recorded every word. Later, I asked my mother to spend time with me on a day I knew Daniel would be free. She quickly declined, claiming she was busy with a friend. The lies were piling higher, and I was the one stacking them. Every day, I grew bolder. Every day, I felt more dangerous. But danger cuts both ways. One night, Daniel stared at me strangely, almost as if he was studying me, as if he wondered whether I was hiding something. My chest tightened. Did he suspect? Did he know I had been watching him so closely? I turned away quickly, pretending to be tired, but my mind screamed. If he found out, if he realized what I was doing, my entire plan could collapse. And so, I added one more rule to my revenge. Never let them see my rage. Never let them hear my cries. Only smiles. Only calmness. Because the quieter I was, the more they would crumble inside. The first small move of revenge came soon after. I sent an anonymous message to Daniel's phone. Just 3 words. "She knows everything." He read it while sitting next to me on the couch. I watched the color drain from his face. His hands trembled slightly, his jaw tightened. He deleted the message quickly, pretending nothing happened. But his eyes, his eyes betrayed him. He was scared. Later, he asked me casually, "Have you been talking to anyone about us?" I tilted my head and laughed softly. "About what?" He forced a smile, but the unease never left his face. The next day, my mother called me in a shaky voice. She asked strange questions like, "Do you still trust Daniel completely? Do you think he would ever lie to you?" Her words cracked like broken glass. I answered calmly, "Of course, Mama. Why wouldn't I?" But inside, I was screaming with triumph. Because my first move had landed, and the ripples were spreading. Still, this was just the beginning. I needed them to suffer more. I needed them to feel the same fear, the same pain they had given me. And so, I planned my next step. A step that would shake them both, harder than ever before. The small games weren't enough anymore. I wanted them to choke on the weight of their lies. So I sharpened my moves. One evening, I told Daniel, "I found an old letter of yours." His face stiffened immediately. "What letter?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. I smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'll keep it safe." I never explained further. And for the rest of the night, he barely spoke. The next day, I told my mother, "Daniel has been planning something behind my back. Do you know anything about it?" Her spoon slipped from her hand, clattering against the plate. She covered quickly, laughing it off. But her eyes, they gave her away. Their calm world was cracking. And I was the one breaking it, piece by piece. I decided to push harder. So, I planted a seed of doubt between them. One afternoon, I called Daniel at work. When he picked up, I whispered, "Do you really think she loves you? Or is she just using you?" Then I hung up before he could reply. That night, he seemed restless. He looked at my mother differently, as if he wondered if I was right. Then I did the same to her. I leaned close and whispered softly, "Men like Daniel, they never stay loyal, even to the women they betray with." She froze, her hands trembling slightly. I saw the unease spread through her. I didn't need them to stop loving each other. I just needed them to mistrust each other. Because mistrust is poison. And slowly, the poison began to work. Daniel became distant from her. She grew sharp with him, snapping at little things. They both tried to act normal in front of me, but the tension between them was obvious. And I thrived on it. Still, there was danger. One night, I overheard Daniel whispering to her angrily, "She's onto us. I can feel it. We have to be careful." My mother replied sharply, "You're imagining things. She doesn't know." But her voice cracked. Even she wasn't convinced. My heart pounded. If they discovered my games, they might turn against me. I had to stay invisible. I had to stay calm. So the next morning, I cooked them breakfast, smiling sweetly, serving them as if nothing was wrong. Inside, though, I was already planning the next trap. I slipped into Daniel's office later that week. On his desk, his phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. Just 4 words. "We need to talk." My chest tightened. I knew exactly what that meant. They were nervous. They wanted to regroup, to plan. But I was already ahead of them. I took a photo of the message, sent it to Daniel from an anonymous number. Attached was the text, "She's watching you." That night, Daniel barely touched his food. He kept glancing at me, then at my mother, as if trying to read our faces. The silence at the table was suffocating, and I loved every second of it. But paranoia wasn't enough anymore. I wanted them to feel the sting of exposure. So I made my first bold strike. During a family dinner with relatives, I raised my glass and said, "You know, the people we trust most sometimes betray us in ways we never expect." The room went silent. Everyone looked at me curiously. Daniel and my mother froze, their faces pale. I smiled calmly, sipping my drink. I never explained, but the damage was done. After that night, whispers began. Relatives asked subtle questions. Friends noticed the tension, and Daniel began to avoid family gatherings altogether. The walls around them were closing in, but still, I wasn't finished. Late one evening, Daniel confronted me. His voice was sharp. "Why do you keep saying strange things? Are you trying to mess with me?" I looked him straight in the eye and whispered, "Are you hiding something worth messing with?" He froze, then stormed out of the room without a word. My mother tried the same. She asked me quietly, "Why do you keep looking at me that way?" I smiled and answered, "Because I'm waiting for you to tell me the truth." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. They were breaking, and I was only just getting started. But deep inside, I felt the risk rising. If they realized I was the one pushing these cracks open, everything could explode too soon. So I reminded myself, patience, control, one move at a time, because the perfect revenge was still ahead. The night of truth finally came. I was done with games. I wanted them cornered, exposed. So I invited them both to dinner. Just the 3 of us. Candles lit, wine poured. The table set perfectly, like a family. But inside, I was preparing for war. Daniel sat across from me, eyes restless, darting toward my mother. She sat stiff, hands folded in her lap, pretending calm. But I could see the fear in her eyes. For a while, I let the silence stretch. The clinking of cutlery, the awkward chewing, the heavy air. Then I put my fork down and looked straight at them. "I know," I said. They froze. Daniel's hand tightened around his glass. My mother's lips parted slightly. "Know what?" Daniel asked, voice sharp. I leaned forward, smiling faintly. "About the 2 of you." The silence exploded like thunder. They didn't speak. Their eyes darted at each other, then back at me. Finally, my mother whispered, "You're mistaken." I laughed softly. "Mistaken? Really? After the late-night calls? After the secret messages? After the looks you share when you think I'm not watching?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" I asked. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the table. One tap. A recording played. My mother's voice, breathless, whispering, "I can't stop thinking about you." Daniel's reply followed, low and hungry. "We have to be careful. She can't know." The sound filled the room. Every word sliced the air. Their faces drained of color. When the recording ended, I leaned back in my chair. "Still think I'm imagining things?" My mother's hand shook. Daniel tried to speak, but his voice cracked. You spied on us?" "Yes," I said coldly, "because I knew long before you thought I did. And I was waiting for this moment." My mother tried again. "Please listen to me." "No." I cut her off. "I've listened enough. Now it's your turn." The silence burned. They shifted in their seats, caught between shame and fear. "You betrayed me," I whispered. "You, my husband. You, my mother. The 2 people I trusted most." The two people who were supposed to protect me. And instead, you destroyed me. Tears blurred my vision, but my voice was steady. Daniel muttered, "It was a mistake." I snapped. "A mistake doesn't last months. A mistake doesn't sneak into my home when I'm asleep. A mistake doesn't whisper promises behind my back." He looked down, ashamed, silent. And then my mother spoke. Her words cut deeper than a knife. "I love him." The air shattered. Daniel's head shot up. My own breath caught in my throat. "You what?" I asked, voice shaking. She looked at me, eyes wet, lips trembling. "I love him. I can't hide it anymore." Daniel's face twisted in shock. He hadn't expected her to confess. I stared at her, my own mother, confessing love for my husband. Something inside me broke, and something else hardened. I stood slowly, my voice low, dangerous. "Then you can have him." They both looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked cautiously. I smiled. "You'll see." And I walked away from the table, leaving them in suffocating silence. But inside, I was already planning my final move, because the real revenge had only just begun. The night after the dinner, I couldn't sleep. Their faces, their silence, her confession. It replayed again and again. But tears were over. The time for pain was done. Now it was time to act. I called my lawyer. I called my best friend. I began to prepare. By the end of the week, I had everything in my hands. The bank statements showing Daniel's lies. The text messages my mother thought she deleted. The photos from the private investigator I had hired. Every piece of betrayal, laid out in neat little files. And then, I made my move. I invited them both again. This time not to dinner, but to a small gathering at home. Family, friends, neighbors. They thought it was just another celebration. They came dressed, smiling, pretending everything was normal. But I had a different plan. I stood in front of everyone, holding a glass of wine, and I began to speak. "Family is everything," I said. "Family means trust, loyalty, love." The room nodded, smiles, agreement. "But what happens," I continued, my voice tightening, "when the ones closest to you are the ones who betray you?" The air shifted. Whispers rippled through the room. Daniel stiffened. My mother's hand clutched her glass too tightly. I turned to the big screen TV. With one click of my remote, the truth lit up for everyone to see. The messages, the late-night calls, the secret meetings, my mother's voice, Daniel's words, recorded, projected, exposed. Gasps filled the room. Hands covered mouths. Eyes widened in shock. Daniel shot to his feet. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked. I stared at him, calm, showing them who you really are. My mother's face turned white. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "This isn't fair." "Fair?" I laughed bitterly. "Was it fair when you stole my husband? Was it fair when you lied to my face? When you crept into shadows like cowards?" The room was silent, every eye burning into them. Daniel growled, "You'll regret this." I stepped closer. "No. The only regret is that I ever loved you." He fell silent. The fight drained from his eyes, because deep down he knew. I turned to my mother. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Please forgive me," she whispered. I shook my head. "You don't get forgiveness. Not tonight. Tonight you get truth." The weight of my words hung heavy. Everyone in that room knew now. There was no hiding, no denying. I had burned their masks. Daniel stood frozen, humiliated. My mother's shoulders shook, her pride crushed. And me, for the first time in months, I felt strong. But strength comes with danger. I could feel it, the tension, the fury behind their silence. Because when people are cornered, they either beg or they strike. And I wasn't sure which one would come next. The room was still. No one dared to breathe. My mother trembled. Daniel clenched his fists. I could see it in their eyes. Rage and shame, fighting for control. Finally, Daniel snapped. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "You've destroyed your own life. Who will want you now? A bitter woman alone?" I smiled coldly. Better alone than chained to a liar. Gasps from the crowd. My aunt whispered something to her husband. My cousin shook her head in disgust. Daniel looked around, realizing he had lost more than me. He had lost respect. Then my mother spoke. Her voice cracked. "Sweetheart, please don't do this." I was weak. I was lonely. I turned on her. "You were my mother. You had everything, my love, my loyalty, my trust. But you wanted more. You wanted him. You took what wasn't yours." She tried to reach for me. I stepped back. Her hand froze midair. "You always told me family means everything," I said softly. "But you burned this family to ashes." Her tears spilled. Daniel's face hardened. He wasn't crying. He wasn't begging. He was furious. He stepped closer. "You'll regret humiliating me." I met his eyes. "Not as much as you'll regret underestimating me." And then the final blow. I reached for the folder on the table. Inside were the divorce papers. Already signed. Already filed. I slapped them onto his chest. The sound cracked like thunder in the silence. Gasps again. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked at the papers, then at me. "It's over," I said. "My love. My marriage. My silence. All over." I turned to my mother. "And you're no longer my mother. Blood doesn't mean family. Family is loyalty. And you chose betrayal." Her knees gave out. She sank to the floor, sobbing. Daniel crumpled the papers in his fist. But his anger meant nothing now, because everything was gone. His reputation, his home, his wife. I stood tall. My voice cut the silence one last time. "This is my revenge. Not rage. Not violence. Just truth. Truth that burns deeper than any knife." And then, I walked away. Behind me, I could hear my mother's broken cries, Daniel's muttered curses, the whispers of family and neighbors carrying the scandal like wildfire. But I didn't stop. I didn't turn back. Not once. Because that night, I wasn't the broken daughter. I wasn't the betrayed wife. I was the survivor. And I had won. The days after the confrontation passed in a blur. At first, there was noise everywhere. Relatives whispering. Neighbors gossiping. Friends calling to check in, though I knew they just wanted details. I ignored most of them. I didn't have the energy to explain, not again, not anymore. The house felt like a ghost town. My mother had gone to stay with her sister. Daniel disappeared, probably hiding from the shame I left him with. And me? I stayed. Alone. The silence was strange. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't heavy. It was empty. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I replayed everything, his words, her tears, my own voice breaking when I told her she was no longer my mother. It cut me deeper than I expected. I had dreamed of revenge. I had planned it carefully. And when it came, I thought it would heal me. But healing didn't come. Not right away. Instead, I felt like a tree after a storm, still standing, yes, but branches broken, roots shaken. One evening, I walked into the kitchen and found my mother's scarf still hanging on the chair. I touched it gently. It smelled faintly of her perfume. For a moment, I almost cried. Because no matter what she had done, she was still the woman who once held me through sleepless nights, who cooked my favorite meals, who called me her little girl. And Daniel, as much as I hated him, I couldn't erase the memories, the laughter, the way he used to look at me before everything shattered, the promises he once made, the dreams we once shared. They were dead now, but ghosts of them still lingered. Revenge had stripped them of power over me, but it hadn't erased the scars they left behind. I realized something. Revenge isn't about peace. It's about survival. It's about standing when the world tries to crush you. It gives you strength, but not always healing. Weeks passed. Slowly, the gossip died down. Slowly, the phone stopped buzzing. Slowly, the world moved on. But I was still here, learning to breathe again, learning to live again. I started small. Morning walks, cooking just for myself, cleaning the house, one room at a time, reclaiming it as mine. And for the first time, I began to see a future that didn't include them. A future where my story wasn't defined by betrayal. A future where I wasn't just someone's wife or someone's daughter. I was me. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky orange and gold, I stood by the window and whispered to myself. They broke me, but I rebuilt myself. I knew I would carry the scars forever. But scars are not just marks of pain. They are proof of survival. And survival, in itself, is victory. So, did I feel peace? Not completely. Did I feel emptiness? Sometimes, yes. But I also felt strength. And strength, I realized, is enough. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't give you the ending you want, but it gives you the ending you need. And this was mine. Thank you for staying with me through this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part spoke to you the most? Share your reflections in the comments. Your voice matters here. If you'd like more emotional English stories for practice and inspiration, don't forget to subscribe and stay connected. And if this video helped you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need the message today.